What is something that you will never forget as long as you live? I will never forget when I was about 5 I asked my blind grandpa, has about 7% vision, why he always smiled. He said because I never know who is looking. I'm having a rough day at work and this made me smile. Thanks for sharing. I still remember I told my grade 2 teacher that if I ever wrote a book I would dedicate it to her because she taught us what book dedications were. You must write a book and dedicate it to your teacher. Last year, I was 10 weeks pregnant when I started having some mild bleeding. I had no pain, so I wanted to ignore it out of nervousness, but I went to the ER anyway. For the rest of my life, I'll always remember that sweet little nurse doing my very silent ultrasound, and finally letting out a big sigh and saying bless your heart. Now, if you're from the south, as I am, you absolutely don't want to hear bless your heart. It sucked. I knew it wasn't looking good at that moment. Turns out, my baby had just quit growing. So a week later, I went to the animal shelter and picked out a kitten. I had never had a cat before, but I was hurting, and I thought if I adopted a baby kitten in need of a home, it would help. I'm a big animal lover, so this wasn't completely outrageous for me. I was sitting in the little kitten tent, wondering what I'm doing with my life, when I feel a little weight on my shoulder. It was a little lanky black kitten, rubbing on my ear. That same kitten, now cat, is racing around my house right now for no reason at all, and I love him to bits. I'll never forget our first encounter, as he reminds me that great things can come out of terrible situations. Both of those things will forever be incredibly prominent moments in my life, regardless of how many more cats or babies I may have. A year or two ago I was driving with my husband and we were talking about childhood memories. I mentioned how bad a memory I have for certain things. Well, he turned to me and started shouting, "Don't forget this. Don't you ever freaking forget this moment right here." And I just started laughing. He made sure I would never forget it. This is my favorite one. When my son was in 7th grade I took about 20 of his friends to the movies. We had to caravan a bunch of cars to get them there, and sitting next to me on the drive there was a quiet, cute kid with a crew cut and glasses. All the kids in the car were talking about their families and out of the blue this boy whispered quietly, "My mom doesn't love me," stopped me cold. Still remember it so clearly. It was like a sad sigh. I said, "Oh, that can't be true. I am sure she loves you very much." Come to find out he had been taken from her recently because of abuse and neglect due to her drug addiction. He was now living with his dad now, and his dad's girlfriend's house. They had no room for him there, so he was sleeping on the floor of the den. I had my eye on him since that day. He came to live with us through a series of events, and stayed for a few years each time. He is my semi-adopted son now, and doing great, in college on full scholarship and happy. I've been down the same road that kid has. Thank you for being there, and taking care of him. Without you, he would have been lost. When I was a police officer I found a young teenager who hung himself in his basement. That, coupled with the blood-curdling scream his father let out when I told him his son was gone. Unforgettable. Watching Comedy Central the morning of 9/11 before school, thinking the plane crashes were just a rather terrible SNL skit, to get to school and realize what actually happened. Freshman year of high school, my school bus didn't show up. I went home and called the school for an explanation. They told me someone had blown up the World Trade Center, to which I replied, "Okay, well that doesn't explain where my bus is." Talk about a 15-year-old with their priorities in order. When I was about 5 I walked past a gaming arcade and I asked my mum, "Can I please go inside and play a game?" Then mum replied, "Yes, when you turn 18. When I turned 18 I told mum, "So can you take me to the arcade now that I'm 18? She laughed because she didn't think I would remember. I'm 26 now and still remember to this day. Probably won't forget unless I came down with Alzheimer's. 419. A number my psychology teacher in high school wrote in the board and told us all forget this number by tomorrow. That was 7 years ago. A few years ago my girlfriend asked me to go to school with her. While it doesn't sound like a big deal, she would drive to school in another city since that was the only school that offered the specific program she wanted. At the time I lived with my parents, so she picked me up, When we stopped at a gas station, she had checked her phone and found out that classes were cancelled, so she didn't have to drive all the way out there. So instead I decided to stay at her place and needed to pick up some clothes. I run to the door and say, "I'm home. Going to pick up stuff so my parents wouldn't freak out if they heard someone in the house." My room was the room within the back and had the back door for the house. I called out to them twice more, and before I could finish a third I heard groaning. I turned around and saw my girlfriend behind me, and we gave each other this wide-eyed holy crap look while we heard my parents making sexy times noises. And let me tell you, they were going at it like freaking cats in heat. We rushed out the door and back to her car, not picking anything up, and leaving the keys in the lock on the back door of the house. My girlfriend told me in the car that her period had started at the very moment she heard my parents grunting and groaning. TLDR. I'll never forget the moment I heard my parents having sex and scaring the period out of my girlfriend. My wife is 31 years old and she still barges into her parents' house like it's her own. She never calls ahead, drops in randomly once every couple weeks at random days and times, and never knocks. I've told her for years that one of these days she's going to lose whatever game she's playing and get an eyeful of disaster. When I was 4, I was sitting in church bored out of my mind, so I told my mom she had a spider in her hair. She freaked out in the middle of prayer. It was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. I thought devils can't enter a church. My first kiss. I meant to say something like "you animal" in a flirtatious tone, but what came out was "you cow." She was not pleased. Putting my dog down. I just remember seeing the life suddenly fade away in her face. Her eyes rolled back in her head and she went limp. One time at a Polish, like Poland, not shiny, festival in Chicago, a booth was giving out these metal whistles. My grandfather had mine in his pocket, so I went up to him to retrieve it. But the person whose pocket I reached into was not my grandfather. The old man started yelling at me in Polish, and I ran. Later they made an announcement to watch out for pickpockets. At the time, I thought pickpockets was some sort of game or something and kept looking for it. Discovering that my father was loved. I never knew my dad. My mother never talked about him, never shared anything about him. I had a single photo of him I discovered when going through my mother's photo negatives. He died in 2007 and I received a notice from his sister. I went to the town he lived in and discovered he went to this particular bowling alley every day for lunch. I went into the bowling alley and discovered a display case that was a memorial to him. It had a leather jacket, ball cap, a perfect cribbage hand he had played against a friend, completed crossword puzzle. He was an expert. There was also a bar stool, reserved, and a glass of beer sitting in front of it. They put the beer out for him after he died for 60 straight days. I got to know my father through the friends he had in his town. It was an awesome feeling. This is going to be a giant wall of text, but a few years ago, one of my high school friends was killed by an IED in Iraq. I went home to go to the funeral and to pay my respects. It was very rough for me as we had been fairly close in high school, and it was difficult for me to process the fact that the man I knew was dead and his body was laying in a coffin. Anyways, when going home I saw that the suckers at Westboro Baptist Church were going to protest. I don't think I have ever been as angry as I was when I heard that, except when I saw them in person. It really hits you when they are protesting at your friend's funeral. Anyways, my hometown steps up to the plate and creates a red wall that is. Tons of people showed up in red and stood shoulder to shoulder along the procession route and surrounding the church where the services were being held. And I don't mean tons in the metaphorical sense. There were literally thousands of people lining the streets in a show of solidarity and to keep those suckers at WBC away from the procession and family. I went to the service, paid the respects, and when the coffin, my friend, was leaving to go on his way to his final resting place, I stepped outside. Everything was quiet, unerringly so. Keep in mind the church was in the middle of a downtown area, and there are literally thousands of people lining the streets shoulder to shoulder, but you could hear a pin drop. Everyone was standing there with their hands over their heart in silence. You couldn't hear cars, people, anything, especially the WBC. Shout out to the Patriot Guard bikers as well. The silence and seeing all those people paying their respects to my friend they had never met is something that I will take with me to my grave. I love my hometown. TL. DR. Friend killed in Iraq. WBC shows up. Hometown steps up and makes a human wall between WBC and the funeral. Thousands line the streets of a fairly large downtown area in complete silence to show their respects. That was intense Reading. I don't think anyone could forget that. Sorry you lost your mate. I remember, very distinctly, the day my father died. Crap, I'm a little shaky just writing this. I was 5, my sister 4, my brother 2. We were playing in the living room that morning. My mom usually let us run in and wake him up, but that day she let him sleep in. When she went in to wake him, it was pleasant at first, then quickly turned to panic. Wake up, wake up. I vividly remember my mother shaking him, telling him to wake up. She then immediately called my aunt. She lived around the corner, to get us. We all went up there and played with my cousins. We were so young we all didn't really know what was going on at first. Just that mom was really upset and something was wrong with dad. She came back a few hours later and took us all in private and told us. We were at a table at first, then we went outside in the process. He had had a heat attack in his sleep at 39. It was just utter sadness. I don't know how my mother did it. I don't know how. She raised the 3 of us practically by herself. I'm sorry, there is more detail. I'm getting really emotional. This is probably buried anyway. But yeah, I freaking love my mom. And that day will never leave my brain. This hit home. I woke up on my 10th birthday, walked out of my bedroom saying I'm double digits, and then I saw my dad giving CPR to my mom on the floor frantically. She died of a heart attack in her sleep at age 41. I remember during all the chaos an aunt brought me to Toys R Us to choose a birthday gift while everyone tried to plan a wake. I was a little kindergarten kid when I watched planes bombing Pearl Harbor in the distance. Then a loud explosion rocked my neighborhood and people started panicking, getting into family cars and driving off, and women were crying all around me. I had not felt such fear again as I felt then. You should do an AMA. Your comment history is intriguing. The sound of my brother's voice on the other end of the line the last time we spoke before he was murdered. I remember every word of that conversation, 20 years later. Dang. Sitting at a bar with a friend. In walks this guy who looks a lot like me. He was older though. There were like 40 people there. The guy walks towards us and starts talking about his youth, his job, his family, and how he reached success. During the conversation I noticed that this guy had a lot of things in common with me. His mother was Dutch, and his father was from Curaçao, really small island in the Caribbean, just like my parents. His father left the family to move back to Curaçao, just like mine. He played basketball during his youth, just like me. Now the creepy part, he suddenly dropped his name. It was the same name as mine. Now I'm not a Kevin, Jake, or Liam. I have an African name from Swahili. He was talking for 45 minutes and he didn't even know us. Didn't order anything, he just walked in and started talking. Back then I wasn't happy with the way things were going for me in life. He didn't know. He gave me some great advice which changed a lot for me. I know it wasn't a prank because I saw his id and I have him as a friend on Facebook. I'm not religious or anything, but man, that moment had me doubting my own sanity. TLDR. Stranger walks up to me and my friend at a bar. He starts talking about his life for an hour. We have an insane amount of things in common. Our roots, hobbies, visions, and even our names are the same. Note, English is not my first language. Sorry for any mistakes. Maybe he was from the future and was giving you advice from the advice he had gotten in his your post. I'll never forget seeing a little girl on a bike get hit by a truck on my road. My cousin and I were in my driveway when it happened, and we both dropped everything and ran faster than we've ever run before. Cops were called. Her mom came, pretty much freaking out. It was a ruckus for our little street. The little girl was okay, really. She had a helmet on and only got bumped and bruised and some pretty bad road rash. The part I'll always remember most was when the man got out of his car. He sat on the curb and cried, and cried, and cried. Seeing my mom collapse in tears on the stairs after she opened the foreclosure letter. She had just walked in from working her usual 10-hour shift, exhausted from the work and hour-long drive back. After months of working 10-hour shifts during the week and a second catering job on the weekend, That night she was just hungry and ready for the day to be over so she could rest. She opened the letter as she was walking in and it just crushed her. She took a few steps up those stairs to her room, but she just lost it. She did everything she could to pay our bills as a single mother, but it just wasn't enough. I remember as a teen thinking there, at the bottom step, looking up at her sobbing on the stairs, what exactly am I good for? Oh dude, hope everything is good now. When I was about 8, my mom had brought home a dozen donuts from Dunkin' Donuts. We didn't touch them that day, despite how much they called to me. In the middle of the night, I gave in. I snuck into the kitchen and nibbled on one. The succulent freshness of that donut made my blatant treason worth it. I turned the donut over to hide my teeth marks. In the morning, my mom's spidey sense kicked in, and she somehow knew that things were amiss. She found my donut and asked me and my sister if we had eaten them. Ashamed, I denied it. My mom suddenly freaked out. Then what ate the donuts? Oh my god, we have mice. She then proceeded to take the entire box of donuts and throw them away. The entire freaking box. I still don't know to this day if she did that to make me pay for my lies or if she really thought there were mice. Either way, it hurt to see them tossed. I will never forgive myself for that. R.I.P. donuts. I'm sorry for my sins. The look on her face when I asked her out after I accidentally rear-ended her car. Still the happiest accident of my life 2 years later. I've posted this before but I feel that it belongs here because it is one of my most unforgettable moments. My husband and I were on our way to our honeymoon in Daytona Beach, Florida when our flight got cancelled. There were no more flights to Daytona Beach leaving until the next day. Needless to say we were and went to every airline counter to try to get to Florida. Finally we found an airline that could get us to Orlando and then a car service was going to drive us the 80 miles or so to Daytona Beach. The flight was late and we didn't roll into Orlando until after 10 p.m. Once we met up with our driver we found out that another man in the same situation as us was going to be sharing the ride to Daytona. The stranger's name was Jeff. Within the first 10 miles my husband immediately fell asleep so I spent most of the drive talking with Jeff. He was much older than us, very friendly and asked lots of questions. When he found out we were newlyweds he congratulated me and asked about our wedding and our plans for the future. All in all it was a pleasant conversation but nothing overly memorable. We reached Jeff's hotel first and before he leaves the car he tells me that he works for Bubba Gump Shrimp Co and he invites us to come down during our stay and have dinner on him. Then he hands me a little white card with the Bubba Gump logo on it. He had written dinner for two on the back. My husband and I didn't think much of it and honestly we weren't totally sure it was even legit, but on the last night of our trip we decided to check the place out. Once we were seated I gave the card to our waiter and before I could even say anything he immediately said, "Are you Jeff's special guests? We've been waiting for you." And suddenly we had 4 waiters assigned to our table. They brought us several appetizers, all the cocktails we wanted with free refills, huge meals. They played Forrest Gump trivia with us practically the entire time and just fawned over us in a ridiculous way. At the end of the meal we tried to refuse dessert as we were both stuffed to the brim and completely drunk and the waiters insisted upon wrapping up 2 desserts to go and wrapping up our huge Bubba Gump glasses to take with us. They said they hoped we had a wonderful time and there would be no bill. They even refused to accept a tip, going so far as to chase us out of the restaurant and force my husband to take back the $50 we tried to leave on the table. It was insane. We never did find out who Jeff was or what position he held with the company, but he must have been pretty high up. It was bar none the nicest, coolest, most amazing thing anyone has ever done for us. We will never forget it and I hope I get the opportunity to do something awesome like that for someone else someday. That story is way too cool to not have any paragraphs. My English teacher crying while we watched the second plane smash into the tower. It was a dark day to be an elementary school kid. Okay, this'll probably get missed entirely but I'd like to tell you the story about it anyway. Way back in the late 90s I had a part-time job at the local funeral home. My job, simply enough, was to call the mortician on duty after hours and dispatch them should a police call. After a few months they decided to train me to run the crematorium should any bodies come in from third-party agencies because it usually takes all night for the retorts to cool. The entire system was computer controlled so it was pretty easy to do. One night, A third-party contractor brought in a body. I received the body and the guy says to me, "Hey, you wanna see something?" So I shrug and say, "Yeah, I guess." He opens the body bag and I see that it's a guy about my age. He looked homeless, but recently so. Certainly not more than 6 to 8 months on the street by his facial hair. What struck me was that he had hung himself. In fact, the noose was still around his neck. Yellow nylon rope. The police had cut him down but not removed it. His tongue stuck out of his mouth, black at the tip. My first impulse was to remove the noose, but the first and most unbreakable rule was never, ever, to touch. Dead people can be very infectious and unless you know what you're doing, it's very dangerous. So I loaded him into retort and I said a prayer for him. Here it was, the end of his existence, and it was with 2 complete strangers with this horrible noose still around his neck. I asked God that whatever this guy did in life, if it would be possible to cut him a break in the next one because no one deserved to go out like he had. And so I burned him, noose and all. It took 3 weeks to find his family and I finally got his name off the death certificate. Thomas Freeman. I swore never to forget his name or his face, and to this day I still haven't. The world just threw this guy away. I can't be complicit in that. He was people. He was my age. Perhaps even one of my peers. Go ahead and make Fight Club jokes, but no one should go out so callously. He deserves to be remembered, and so I'll never forget. The night my GF died and I caught her as she fell to the floor, laid her head in my lap and had looked into her lifeless eyes. I could not look a person in the eyes for many years after that. Had a similar experience in 1996. A close second was explaining the dead 21-year-old female in my bed to a bunch of very skeptical police at 6 AM on a Sunday morning. Yesterday a man died right in front of me. I was at a football match. The bloke sat 2 rows in front of me collapsed. I didn't know at the time, but he had a heart attack. All the crowd around him was shouting for the stewards and paramedics to come up and help him. They didn't realize at first, so it took them a while. Once they got to him they started giving him CPR. Then 5 minutes later they took him out on a stretcher. He was dead on arrival to the hospital. My grandparents. How much they loved and cherished me, even the freak that I am, from being handicapped. I haven't had any grandparents since they all died mid-1980s and 1990. I miss them terribly each day. You're not a freak, you're you, and that's awesome. The night I had to take my 16 years old daughter to the ER because she attempted suicide. Her suicide note among many things asked me to please go on the trip we planned to go to on her 17th birthday anyway. Her birthday is in July. At midnight, the warm little kitten died in my hands. When I was 15, my cat had a litter of 5 kittens. Then, when they were a couple of weeks old, Mama cat got the cat flu, and so did 3 of the kittens. One in particular was very sick. He wouldn't feed, not even with a dropper. We decided to keep him away from the others. The vet said that there wasn't much else we could do. The end was near. I knew that he would pass soon, and there was no way in heck he was going to die alone. My mother and brother went to bed. I held him, kept him warm, for hours. I was frightened. When he did pass away peacefully, it was scary and sad, but I was glad that I was there with him. Almost a decade later that phrase song came out in the lyric "I would have stayed up with you all night, had I known how to save a life" brings it all back. And for years after that, the clock striking midnight would creep me out a little. If alone, I'd feel a little frightened. We buried him in our backyard. All the other kittens survived, but I'll never forget that tiny black and white kitten and the moments we shared. Rest in peace, little guy. R.I.P. One bright day in the middle of the night, 2 dead boys got up to fight. Back to back they faced each other, drew their swords and shot each other. A deaf policeman heard the noise, came and shot those 2 dead boys. If you say my lie isn't true, ask the blind man, he saw it too. I was a Cub Scout. My dad used to say that all the time when I was younger. I had forgotten about it until you just reminded me. Thanks. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.